Scientology. Its church has garnered worldwide fame and controversy thanks to the stars who glorify it in the media.
I've had a great deal of help from Dianetics and Scientology to handle all my ups and downs.
This glamorous image has built Scientology into a powerful, wealthy operation centered around its founder and quasi-messiah, L. Ron Hubbard.
There's one person who's in charge. First, that person was L. Ron Hubbard, and all of Scientology exists to enrich that person.
At the base of the pyramid stand ordinary Scientologists, drawn to the promise of this radical method of self-development.
Auditing consists of finding where there's been a problem in one's life, whether in one's present life or previous ones.
To gain spiritual enlightenment, some members are encouraged to spend ungodly amounts of money.
So finally, by the end, if you achieve the highest levels of Scientology, you will have paid somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million.
Though it's recognized as a religion in the United States, many countries consider Scientology a cult.
Scientology is like the ne plus ultra of cult.
According to former members, church leadership training demands military discipline that goes beyond inhumane.
You're not allowed to talk, urinate, or sit, and you have 15 or 16 hours of work a day, interspersed with sessions of self-denunciation and denunciation of others.
And if members dare to leave Scientology, they face hounding and harassment.
I'm a private investigator, and I'm investigating you on your actions against the Church of Scientology.
By the Office of Special Affairs, Scientology's secret service.
It's an absolutely abominable combination of the Holy Inquisition and the KGB.
Critics argue the Church of Scientology used covert, illegal means to change French law and prevent the dissolution of the Church of France.
Never in the judicial history of this country have so many things occurred that escape all comprehension. Nothing can stop the Church of Scientology.
How did Scientology become Scientology? How is it structured? What are its provocative recruitment techniques? And how did this divisive operation manage to spread its tentacles around the world? Now, join experts and former ranking Scientology members as they unmask one of the most powerful, self-styled religious organizations on the planet. The Church of Scientology. February 10, 2008. From Los Angeles to Tokyo, a new kind of protester was marching in front of Scientology centers all around the world. A total of 50 cities were affected. The protesters wore Guy Fawkes masks, a symbol of Anonymous, a group of hackers that had just declared war on Scientology.
Hello, leaders of Scientology. We are Anonymous. Over the years, we have been watching you. Anonymous has therefore decided that your organization should be destroyed.
Their goal? To unveil the dark secrets of the church and denounce its excesses. They hid their faces because they feared retaliation from what they believed to be one of the most destructive cults on the planet.
I was raised in Scientology by my parents, who got involved when I was about 4 years old. And when you start speaking out, like I did, the church will then target you.
For the church, the consequences of the demonstrations were dramatic. Since the birth of the movement, the number of followers in the world has decreased by half. This exodus is affecting not only ordinary members, but also high-ranking Scientologists such as Mark Rinder, who left the cult in 2007.
Please welcome Mr. Mike Rinder.
I grew up a Scientologist. I knew very few people who were not Scientologists. That was the only world I ever knew. When I escaped, I walked into a world of nothing, nobody.
Faced with this threat weighing on their shoulders, some former followers prefer to remain anonymous, like this Frenchman who came out after discovering the hidden side of the cult.
I was pushed to join the Scientology Secret Service. I had the opportunity to see and read documents that spoke of kidnappings, trafficking, attempted murders, and wiretapping, all to harm people and the so-called enemies of Scientology.
Most of the people appearing in this documentary have already been sued by Scientology, which denies their claims. They run the risk of being targeted by a legal offensive once again.
This program that you're making today will obviously be scrutinized. People will be interested in you and in me. They've been interested in me for a long time.
Hello and welcome. You've probably heard of Scientology. In fact, every 6 seconds, someone searches the question, what is Scientology? There's a lot of talk about us, and we get it. People are curious.
This man speaking out in defense of Scientology is David Miscavige. He is keen to represent a polished vision of the church he has been leading since 1986.
Our approach is new, our answers are new, and that Scientology is not just something you believe in, it's something you do.
This modern presentation is the image that Scientology offers to future followers, that of a method of personal development based on the conviction that human beings have unexplored potential.
Scientology presents itself to the public as a spiritual organization, a religion even, that exists to help people improve themselves. There's no God in Scientology.
Instead, Scientology asserts that you're a god and that you have simply forgotten who you really are and what you're really all about.
The whole goal of Scientology is to help the Thetans that we are to recover these forgotten powers.
Powers buried deep in the human mind. To explain this, the church bases its doctrine on reincarnation and puts forward the idea that humans are immortal spiritual beings called Thetans.
And the idea in Scientology is that you have lived a nearly infinite amount of time in the past, and you cannot die. However, the quality of your life will suffer because of all of the accumulated stress and trauma that you've experienced every time you've lived, every time you've died.
To regain these hidden powers, followers must engage in auditing sessions, a practice that involves recounting one's past traumas to a member of the Scientology clergy. The therapy is validated by a tool called an e-meter.
Auditing consists of figuring out where there's been a problem in one's life, whether in one's present life, intrauterine life, or previous lives that can go back as far as 70 million years.
You can do the same kind of thing at any psychoanalyst's office. The difference is that Scientology presents it as an extremely scientific process.
The needle on the e-meter measure what is going on with you, your worries, your thoughts, more accurately than you can understand them, because it is slightly below your awareness level.
An e-meter or an electropsychometer, which is really just a lie detector. But Scientology asserts that it is actually registering your mental or psychological state.
Auditing sessions must be paid for, just like all the other courses and technologies offered by Scientology.
Scientology is not free. You have to pay. It starts off $50, $100 for a course or for some auditing, but very quickly those prices escalate. So finally, by the end, if you achieve the highest levels of Scientology, you will have paid somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million.
Behind this money is the promise of extraordinary capabilities like those of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology and a true messiah.
Hubbard pretended basically that he was not from this planet, that he had been sent here to save mankind.
L. Ron Hubbard claimed in various lectures and in his writings that he had attained the ability to move objects, to read thoughts, to control people.
Considered the spiritual guide of the religion, his history is shrouded in a mysterious aura. He's spoken of as an intrepid adventurer, a daring aviator, and a researcher constantly seeking new discoveries.
Hubbard was a kind of 20th century genius, a great man who was an expert in a lot of different disciplines, a Renaissance man from another time.
There is no question that L. Ron Hubbard was a larger-than-life personality. He was big, he was loud, he walked into a room and you knew he was there.
His life was like a movie. That's who L. Ron Hubbard was, a movie character.
Born in 1908, L. Ron Hubbard was first and foremost a science fiction writer who published his stories in popular pulp magazines sold in the 1930s. Today, he remains the most prolific and translated author in the world, with more than 1,000 works published to date.
Everything about L. Ron Hubbard could really be summed up in one word: storytelling.
So he wrote hundreds and hundreds of stories and got paid for them through the times of the Depression and through the 1930s. And then the World War II came along, and he very, very much wanted to be an intelligence officer.
Hubbard enlisted in the Navy in 1941. A year later, he was wounded in a naval battle of which he was said to be the only survivor. He was transferred to the hospital where doctors were unable to heal his injuries.
He told himself that he was stronger than everyone else, that he would invent a technique that would allow him to heal himself and others.
He presented it as a system that helped him heal himself from his war wounds through the power of thought.
That's when he wrote Dianetics.
With its cover depicting an erupting volcano, Dianetics was published in 1950. It was one of the world's first methods for personal development, and the book became a bestseller in the United States.
At the time, the mix of psychotherapy and the power of positive thinking was very popular. And for a while in the United States, there were quite a few people having Dianetics parties.
It was the Cold War. People were in fear about all sorts of things. And Dianetics basically told them, you can cure whatever is wrong with you. You don't need to do anything. You just need to buy this book and do what I tell you to do in the book.
But Hubbard soon ran into trouble because what he claimed about his past wasn't entirely accurate. Even worse, he was said to have taken great liberties with his personal history and that of Dianetics.
The truth of the life of L. Ron Hubbard is quite different than the story that he presented of his life. You know, he claimed that he was a war hero. He was not. He claimed that he was a nuclear physicist. He was not.
His life was a series of failures. He failed out of college. He did not do well professionally. The only skill he really had was writing stories.
He had a knack for transforming those failures into successes. That was his strength. L. Ron Hubbard was constantly rewriting his history to make it fit his plans.
Navy records released in 2013 show that he didn't take part in any battles. During World War II, he was hospitalized not for war wounds, but rather stomach ulcers. The story of Dianetics was therefore a myth, and the scientific community began to question Hubbard's method.
A number of medical associations came out and said that what he was doing didn't meet the criteria of medical practice as we understand it.
He was making claims that he could cure leukemia and cancer and bad eyesight. And these were medical claims. And Hubbard didn't know anything about science because he'd failed out of college.
Those critiques carried more and more weight in public opinion, to such an extent that it started to threaten his business.
He said, I can't keep pushing a science because actual scientists keep telling me this doesn't work, it's not science. So he went, well, religion. That's how I can get away with this.
In 1954, he founded Scientology, a pyramidal structure that relied on local churches. They disseminated the theory of Dianetics and audited followers. These were paid services, of which Hubbard took a cut.
There's one person who's in charge. First, that person was L. Ron Hubbard, and all of Scientology exists to enrich that person.
L. Ron Hubbard once said that if you want to make millions, the best thing to do is found a religion. Religion has one primary purpose, which is to allow me to make more money. You're not supposed to say it, but in the US, it's obvious that it's true.
The creation of Scientology allowed L. Ron Hubbard to avoid bankruptcy. But in order to attract new followers, he still had to improve the image of the church. In the mid-1950s, he came up with a formidable marketing strategy, a plan that capitalized on the American audience's love of movie stars.
His goal was to get people talking about him, to try to get as many members as possible, to bring in as much money as possible.
In the mid-1950s, L. Ron Hubbard realized that celebrities were idolized by the general public. They are seen as the model or epitome of success. And L. Ron Hubbard realized that celebrities could help forward the message of Scientology, because if a celebrity was a Scientologist, that would be proof that Scientology works.
Hubbard designed places to help celebrities in their careers while teaching them the philosophy of Scientology. Celebrity centers.
The idea of these organizations is that they are there specifically to reach and suck in celebrities.
Basically, they offer people in the artistic field who have a certain potential, but who are at the early stages of their career, and offer them the best conditions for their development. Then, if a person succeeds, the church says it's because they followed the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard.
The first celebrity to glorify Scientology was John Travolta. Quite the catch. Just before the actor's career took off with the release of Saturday Night Fever in 1977.
I've had a great deal of help from Dianetics and Scientology to handle all my ups and downs. I've had enough success to prove it a valid form, you know.
A few years later, the man who would become one of the most famous actors on the planet converted to Scientology, Tom Cruise.
When John Travolta signed up for Scientology in the 1970s and Tom Cruise signed up with Scientology in the 1980s, these were mega stars. These were people who had large followings with thousands of people who almost worshiped them.
It was the golden age of Scientology. With support from stars, the church managed to make people forget the critics, in particular those who questioned the techniques used to recruit new followers, which some considered to be immoral.
Hello? Hello? Can I ask you a question? Are you familiar with the Dianetics personality test?
L. Ron Hubbard's goal was to get people talking about him, to try to get as many members as possible to bring in as much money as possible.
Hubbard was always looking for ways to get what he called raw meat, new people into Scientology. All fundamentally rely on a principle saying the way to get people into Scientology is to find their ruin.
Finding a person's ruin is the core recruitment technique for Scientology. What they want to do is find that weakness, that one thing that you want to deal with that you cannot seem to solve yourself. It's been ruining your life. That's why it's called a ruin.
Scientologists look for ruin in the street with the help of a personality test, the Oxford Capacity Analysis Test, a questionnaire described by Hubbard as one of the most effective sources of recruitment.
This is a series of 200 questions that Scientology passes out to people and encourages them to come in and find out about yourself and learn about what you need to improve your life. It's a totally bogus test. It was invented by a woman in Los Angeles who had absolutely no credentials to do it.
There are 200 questions and the results are always the same. Oh yes, you're not doing well at all. You're lucky you met us. But with that test, you always lose, every time.
There were people in tears, people who had been having an absolutely normal Saturday afternoon and were smiling at 4, but by 6 they realized that they were terribly disturbed and sick, that something had to be done immediately.
And then as soon as they find something the person will agree with, they burrow in on that. This is now their ruin, and say, Scientology can help you with that.
Oh, we have this communications class. Oh, we have this class in how to overcome the ups and downs of life. And if you take this class, you won't have that problem anymore. Well, where do I sign up? And that's how they get people in. That's how they got me in, and that's how I got other people in.
These recruitment strategies allowed the church to expand its ranks starting in the late 1950s. This growth attracted more and more attention from the authorities as Hubbard continued building one of the most scandalous structures in the world. In the 1960s, the Church of Scientology was in the crosshairs of several governments for the illegal practice of medicine and personal enrichment. To escape sanctions, Hubbard bought a fleet of ships and hid in international waters. The Sea Organization was born.
Hubbard was under attack by governments in the UK and the US, and he took off, bought a ship, took the most dedicated Scientologists and went sailing in the Mediterranean in order to avoid government oversight, so it started being called the Sea Organization.
In the service of its leader, the Sea Organization is modeled after the US Navy Hubbard served in. It adopts many of its codes, including the uniform.
The Sea Organization is a paramilitary outfit. They use naval symbology and ranks and ratings, and they salute. They are very structured, very disciplined.
L. Ron Hubbard insisted on the rigorous discipline of the Navy aboard the ship, which was a closed environment, of course. So discipline was very important. If you ever go on a submarine, you'll see that obedience is paramount because the fate of the ship is at stake.
Repatriated to the United States in 1975, the Sea Organization remains the elite of Scientology. It continues to recruit young Scientologists from all over the world and demands their full commitment.
The Sea Organization consists of the inner core group of the most fanatical believers. I was part of the Sea Organization for 17 years, and in order to become a Sea Org member, you have to sign a commitment of 1 billion years of your existence. That's how committed they are.
Why 1 billion years? Because we're going to be reincarnated and we're going to live several lives. We've lived many lives before and will live many lives after. It reinforces the group mentality.
Like an elite group of soldier monks, the members of the Sea Organization dedicate themselves body and soul to Scientology. Family doesn't have the same importance there.
I have 2 children who were born into the Sea Org. We basically turned them over to other Sea Org members to raise them from 3 days old until today. Then as soon as they were old enough to read and write, they started being indoctrinated into Scientology courses.
As Sea Org members, you give everything to Scientology. Your family, your spouse, your children don't mean as much as Scientology does. In fact, they don't mean much of anything compared to Scientology.
Members of the Sea Organization dedicate their entire existence to Scientology. Their daily lives are dictated by work and the orders of the hierarchy, and failure is not an option.
Anything that L. Ron Hubbard wanted, that's what Scientology does. This is called command intention in Scientology, and everybody knows that term. There is no questioning command intention. If you get in the way of command intention, you are gotten out of the way.
With its rigid discipline at the service of a pyramidal organization, the Sea Organization is an opaque institution that holds many secrets even for ordinary Scientologists. One of them has been the subject of much discussion, as it's said to be one of the worst abuses of the Church of Scientology: the Rehabilitation Project Force, or RPF.
The Rehabilitation Project Force is a Sea Org prison camp, and it's a re-education program that's meant to change your thinking about the Sea Organization and about Scientology.
It's, Korean POW camp style of thought reform.
Established by L. Ron Hubbard in 1974, the RPF re-educates members of the Sea Organization who have failed in their missions. In 2005, while he was a spokesman for Scientology, Mike Rinder was sent there for 2 years.
You are not allowed to talk to anybody outside of the RPF. You have to wear a black boiler suit to do dirty, menial labor for all day.
At different points in time, Lucas Legal and Chris Shelton also went through the Rehabilitation Project Force program. They described the same rules, daily work, and humiliation.
There are no holidays, there are no time off. There is no seeing your spouse. You don't go home at night. You don't have a holiday. You don't have an anniversary.
You have 30 seconds to use the toilet in the morning. You're not allowed to talk, urinate, or sit. And you have 15 or 16 hours of work a day.
And this went on day after day, week after week, month after month. And I was on the program for 3 years and 3 months. I knew people who were on the program for 10 years.
Unbearable hours of physical labor imposed on people of all ages with no regard for injury.
I broke my finger, and I was not allowed to go to the hospital for 24 hours. They just said the pain only existed in my head, and I didn't need medical attention.
Others describe alleged torture sessions attended by the head of Scientology himself.
David Miscavige was quite fond of witnessing the torture of his own employees. I remember sessions where they'd leave you outside under the hot California sun for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Then they'd lock you up, tie you to a chair underneath an air conditioner, and throw buckets of ice water in your face for 30 to 60 minutes.
At their wits' end, some Scientologists decide to leave the organization before the end of the rehabilitation program. Lucas Legal, on the other hand, chose to complete the program before fleeing in 1982. A spectacular escape from the Scientology headquarters in Hemet, California.
I knew I had to leave. I made my escape plan. I looked for weak points in the 4-meter-high fence with spikes inside and out. I took note of where the cameras were and I watched the rounds, because obviously there were guards doing rounds.
On his 18th birthday, Lucas got up at 4 a.m. and pretended to go to the bathroom.
I escaped in my boxers and a t-shirt. I found myself alone in the California desert at 4 a.m. with only a little money and my passport. I lived a few hours of terror, because now that I was out, I didn't want to be caught.
Lucas headed to the Los Angeles airport with a single goal in mind: to return to Paris.
When I got to the airport, I was still scared to death. I bought a one-way ticket to France. At one point, I heard my name being called over the airport loudspeaker. They had come to the airport to pick me up. I changed my flight to Paris for one to Berlin, thinking that once I got to Berlin, I'd take another flight to Paris.
The next day, when his plane took off, Lucas took off for a new life far away from Scientology. But according to him and other followers, leaving the Sea Organization wasn't quite the end of the ordeal.
The first level of what occurs to a person after they leave the Sea Organization is they tend to be ostracized. They're sort of relegated to becoming a second-class citizen.
When I escaped, I walked into a world of nothing. Nobody. I didn't have any real connections, and that is what Scientology uses to control people and prevent them from stepping off the reservation.
For former members of the Sea organization, the worst was yet to come. For after ostracization comes disconnection, a rule that aims to brand any former follower who publicly criticizes the organization with a seal of infamy.
Now you are not only an ostracized bad person, now you're evil. No Scientologist in good standing is allowed to talk to you, communicate with you, or have any relationship with you.
After you leave Scientology, if your own children have stayed inside the church, they'll consider you as a renegade, an apostate.
You literally can lose every member of your family. That happened to me. My parents, my siblings, my children, all disconnected from me.
This rule originated in the 1950s when Hubbard created the church policy for suppressive persons, a fighting term that refers to any person or group that hinders Scientology. They become the target of the Fair Game, or Black Propaganda program.
And you are now, as a suppressive person, subject to what's called fair game. Scientologists can stalk you, harass you, sue you, attack you physically, do whatever they want. You're fair game.
This black propaganda is orchestrated by what some describe as one of the most shocking parts of the Sea organization, the Office of Special Affairs.
If former members of Scientology or if government agencies were to try to take action against Scientology, it would be the job of OSA to deal with them. And by deal with them, I mean get rid of them.
It's an absolutely abominable combination of the Holy Inquisition and the KGB. It's a political police force that hunts down opponents of Scientology. To my knowledge, there are no other religious organizations that have developed anything like it.
Mike Rinder is one of the few experts who knows the Office of Special Affairs well. He led it during his time at the head of the organization from 1982 to 2005.
My duties in the Office of Special Affairs were the eradication of attackers through payoff, through legal cases, through intimidation, whatever means necessary to accomplish that end remains the modus operandi of the Office of Special Affairs of Scientology to this day.
It's a secret modus operandi that Mike Rinder didn't forget when he left Scientology. This knowledge makes him one of the greatest threats to the church. The former head of the Office of Special Affairs has now become a target himself.
Scientology has done its best to intimidate or harass me to not speak.
Since leaving Scientology in 2007, Mike Rinder has been filming the harassment he claims to have been subjected to every single day. Vehicles that track him on a daily basis.
Oh, he's gotta run,
Which he doesn't hesitate to pursue.
He's going over the curb, amazing.
A camera hidden in a neighbor's birdhouse to monitor his house.
You can see also, if you look inside these holes, there's no birds, there's no seed.
Even Mike Rinder's garbage cans have been stolen by strangers.
Who are you getting that for? That's my garbage. Garbage? Yeah, it is. Mike Rinder.
And to increase the pressure, Scientology sends private detectives paid up to $10,000 a week.
You don't know who I am? My name's private investigator, and I'm investigating you on your actions against the Church of Scientology, but also you as an accomplice to mortgage fraud.
When they can't find anything else, the Church of Scientology uses its ultimate weapon, family.
The primary means of harassment is by putting out internet sites, using my daughter in particular.
As the daughter of Mike Rinder, I felt like I didn't have a father.
None of those campaigns have been successful. They haven't stopped me from speaking, but they continue because that's what the Hubbard policy says.
There are other groups of sectarian nature that use black propaganda techniques or techniques similar to those used by Scientology, but it's not on the same scale.
And that's how Scientology deals with its critics and deals with its former members. It's vicious, it is incredibly vindictive, and there is nothing good about it.
It's an organization that believes it isn't subject to the laws that govern us because it works for humanity, for the happiness of humanity. That's what it claims, at any rate.
As soon as it was created, the Church of Scientology sought to obtain an extraordinary legal status, a legal protection for which it would fight with all its might, and which was the most crucial step in its entire history. To understand, we have to go back to January 24th, 1986. When David Miscavige, a 26-year-old auditor and cameraman, announced Hubbard's death.
At 2000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days.
It was probably the first time most Scientologists had seen David Miscavige's face. No one saw it coming, but he took over the organization.
David Miscavige took over Scientology ultimately as its dictator and head.
Still, little is known to the general public when he took the reins of Scientology in 1984, behind the scenes. David Miscavige had managed to remove all his opponents within the organization.
There's no doubt that Miscavige, who is now the head of Scientology, used verbal and physical violence against his colleagues to impose his will.
But the victory was short-lived for the new head of the church, as Scientology was riddled with debt. It owed $1 billion in taxes to the United States.
His biggest problem was the IRS and this tax bill. It was huge. And Scientology was actually at a brink where it was not going to be able to continue to exist.
So Miscavige basically decided, I'm declaring war on the IRS. And we in OSA started campaigns to find every disgruntled IRS employee and put them in magazines to get, like, it was a massive campaign.
Members of the IRS were subjected to intense harassment. But that's not all. The church also launched the biggest legal attack in the history of the American Internal Revenue Service. 2,500 lawsuits were filed against the administration. It was a strategy that paid off and one that would change the course of Scientology's history forever.
For each case, they needed a lawyer. All the legal proceedings were subject to appeal. It dragged on for years. And after a while, the IRS threw in the towel and conceded that Scientology was indeed a religion.
They gave in. They couldn't fight it anymore. They didn't want to fight it anymore. And Miscavige emerged unassailable from that point on.
L. Ron Hubbard said to get rich, you have to become a religion. Miscavige succeeded.
The IRS issued letters recognizing Scientology and every one of its organizations as fully tax exempt.
Exempt from taxes, and most importantly, recognized as a religion in 1993, Scientology now enjoyed the protection of the U.S. Constitution, a status with far-reaching consequences.
If the IRS has granted you tax-exempt status as a religious organization, you basically are afforded all the rights of religions in the courts. You basically can do what you want.
Child labor laws can be violated, educational standards can be violated, children can even be abused, adults can be abused, and they get a pass because it's a religious activity. I can't stress enough what a victory this was for David Miscavige and for Scientology's continued existence.
After triumphing in the United States, David Miscavige, the new leader of the cult, had a new goal: to conquer the world. On the other side of the Atlantic, in France, Scientology wasn't much of a concern in the 1990s.
Before, people in sects were thought of as mild-mannered and enlightened. There might be a few problems from time to time, but nothing serious. Then the shock of the 2 Solar Temple massacres occurred.
On the night of December 15, 1995, in France, 16 people committed suicide in what appeared to be a ritual massacre. These tragic events prompted the courts to take an interest in sectarian movements.
That was the turning point in the fight against cults. They entrusted the task to the French National Police, and the first organization they looked at was the Church of Scientology.
A severe sentence from the Criminal Court of Lyon for the president of the Church of Scientology. 3 years in prison, half of which is a suspended sentence.
Under surveillance by the intelligence service, the church was powerless to prevent 15 of its members from being convicted in Lyon in 1996. It was the first time the cult's methods had been analyzed so closely in France. At the Scientology headquarters, news of the judgment was badly received. Behind the scenes, the church began preparing its counterattack.
Once they had gained the status of a religion in the United States, they used that newfound respectability to start lobbying.
They got the IRS and other government agencies to write letters to the other government and pressure them to recognize Scientology as a religion and say that they should be supported.
In the 1990s, there were U.S. government officials lecturing their counterparts in Europe to try to get them to take some pressure off of Scientology.
The tension between the two allies was at its peak, but one man embodied change and tried to calm things down: Nicolas Sarkozy. Recently appointed Minister of the Interior, he was convinced that the road to the French presidency went through Washington and sought to give tokens of friendship to the Americans.
In Nicolas Sarkozy's entourage, a certain number of advisors believed that the Church of Scientology was the victim of a kind of witch hunt, and that it was wrong to prosecute or persecute it.
According to a former agent, the intelligence service was forcefully asked to back off Scientology. This was a godsend for the church, which sent its best ambassador to meet Nicolas Sarkozy, Tom Cruise.
What are you doing here?
Nicolas Sarkozy was Minister of the Economy, and there were photos in Paris Match magazine with Tom Cruise acting the star on board a riverboat taking him to the Ministry of Finance in Bercy. Nicolas Sarkozy was very happy to appear with Tom Cruise, but he was more than just the star of Mission Impossible and the handsome kid from Top Gun. He was also a leader of the International Church of Scientology, with whom France was in a legal dispute.
Sarkozy said he met with him because he was interested in cinema and Tom Cruise's movies. Tom Cruise said that he was there to talk about Scientology, and by talking about Scientology, he meant trying to get it recognized as a religion.
Nicolas Sarkozy, the future French president, seemed prepared to ease the pressure on Scientology, but only in appearance. The movement was about to face the most serious threat in its history in the country. It all began in 1998, when a former follower accused it of fraud by an organization.
In just 2 months, she spent 140,000 francs, the equivalent of more than $23,000.
The case seemed trivial, but 11 years later, it led to the biggest trial of Scientology in France, where the cult was threatened with dissolution.
The stakes in the 2009 trial were very high, because if they were convicted, how could they continue to function? That's why the legal battle was so brutal.
While the case raged on at the Paris Court of Appeal, the Scientology trial had an extraordinary outcome.
Something happened that seemed almost, how can I put it, supernatural.
When I testified in court, all the Scientology lawyers were there. I expected them to destroy me. Much to my surprise, nothing happened.
They discovered that the text of the law the prosecution had built its case on had been modified by the National Assembly, and that the option of dissolving the legal entity of the Church of Scientology was no longer possible, because the penal code itself had been altered.
The law that allowed the dissolution of Scientology had been changed, so it was an unexpected reversal.
A change in the obscure law allowed the church to escape dissolution. It was a surprising reversal, as this was not the first time the French justice system had blundered in its prosecution of the Church of Scientology.
Documents in this case against Scientology had disappeared, and contrary to normal procedure, no copies of the files had been made. As a result, such disappearances led to the dismissal of all or part of the case.
2 years later, the sealed files for another case involving the Church of Scientology were destroyed, supposedly by mistake.
It was found that sealed records had been burned. All the evidence against the Church of Scientology was no longer needed, so it was incinerated.
These anomalies in the French judicial system remain unexplained to this day and still disturb experts on Scientology.
Never in the judicial history of this country have so many things occurred that escape all comprehension and logic. Nothing can stop the Church of Scientology.
And yet, on the other side of the Atlantic, Scientology's decline was already underway. The danger came not from the courts, but from a technology that was increasingly widespread and that would change the fate of the Church forever. The internet has found its way into homes all over the world. Behind their computers, former followers started speaking out against the Church, a cause taken up by young hackers united under the banner of Anonymous, leading up to a final confrontation.
Out of nowhere, suddenly there's people outside of Scientology organizations all over the world wearing Guy Fawkes masks and saying, we're going to expose everything about Scientology to the world.
And Anonymous was providing facts and evidence of Scientology's abusive practices. And people went, wait a second, this isn't right. And the media then started paying more and more attention to that.
Tainted by the anonymous protests, the image of Scientology changed forever in the years that followed. The mainstream media was no longer afraid to attack the Church, causing mass defections.
David Miscavige physically assaulted me 5 separate times.
And what does everybody in the room do?
You don't want to do anything that will attract attention to you so that you're the next one.
That hurt Scientology badly. One of the reasons why Scientology is losing so many followers is that people who have suffered inside the Church are releasing accounts of what happened into the public domain.
Some very high-level defectors started talking very openly about the abuses at the very top of the organization.
It's impossible to know how many Scientologists have left the organization since the late 2000s, but it seems to be a very large-scale exodus. Some people estimate that there are now only 30,000 members left around the world.
If we look at the official figures kept by the representative of Scientology in France, there are 5,000 members. In reality, that number should be divided by 10.
Scientology today is a pale shadow of what they once were. It's a very small group. And people think that there are millions of Scientologists. It's because Scientology keeps saying that. And I happen to know from when I was in Scientology, I saw the numbers. And they were not millions of members. They never had millions of members.
But the cult of L. Ron Hubbard hasn't had its final say. With a real estate portfolio estimated to be worth several billions of dollars, its resources allow it to maintain considerable influence as it prepares for a great comeback.
Today's Scientology is shriveling. It is shrinking rapidly. But don't misunderstand that.
Scientology actually could have a comeback. That's not a joke. It could happen easily.
It's becoming, in some ways, more dangerous because the remaining people are more fundamentalist
France seems to be particularly targeted by Scientology's policy of renewal. The Church of Scientology recently acquired a building very close to Paris to establish their French headquarters.
We know they bought a huge building. We can expect to see them distributing flyers and offering personality tests.
It has invested colossal sums to establish itself in a strategic area across the state of France, a major sporting venue. The building will be seen by everyone who comes to the matches. The idea is that everyone who sees the building will be impressed by its grandiose appearance and want to join the church.
While Scientology is working to increase its presence in France, some observers are especially worried about the legacy it leaves behind. At the same time, the country has seen an explosion in the number of cult-related issues.
Today, despite an extremely strong resurgence of sectarian movements in 2020, the state has gradually abandoned its role in shutting them down. In France today, there are 70,000 to 80,000 children in sectarian movements.
After 70 years of existence, L. Ron Hubbard's church has escaped extinction many times. Between exile, black propaganda, and incredible judicial twists and turns, in the age of social media, will it succeed in erasing the suspicions of sectarian influence and violence that it leaves behind?
So take a look, and then decide for yourself.